Leah's fork scraped the plate like a blade, her confession slicing through the silence of their Seattle kitchen. "I slept with Dan, my boss," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and disdain, as if she just admitted to switching coffee brands. Nick Calvin, her husband, stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking into his chest like cold steel. It was a rainy Thursday evening in their Capitol Hill home, a sleek modern fortress of glass and cedar that Nick had built from the ground up with his logistics empire. He'd just returned from a grueling 3-day trip to Portland, untangling a supply chain mess that had kept him awake for nights. His suitcase still sat by the door, unzipped, a silent witness to the life he thought he knew. Leah, 35, perched on a bar stool at the kitchen island, her tailored blazer and sharp heels screaming ambition. She looked like she'd stepped off the set of a corporate photo shoot, her auburn hair pulled into a flawless bun. But her eyes, those sharp green eyes, wouldn't meet his. They darted to her phone, to the half-eaten pad thai, anywhere but Nick. "Is there someone else?" Nick asked, his voice low, steady, though his pulse thrummed in his ears. He already knew. He'd seen the late nights, the cryptic texts, the way she'd started dressing like she was auditioning for a corner office. But he needed to hear it, needed her to say it. Leah snorted, a sound that was half laugh, half scoff, the kind you'd give a waiter who got your order wrong. "I slept with Dan, my boss," she repeated, stabbing a noodle with her fork. "No big deal." She paused, her lips curling into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not like you were exciting anyway." The word exciting hit like a slap. Nick, 38, had clawed his way from a 2-man trucking operation in a Tacoma storage unit to a multimillion-dollar logistics network that spanned the Pacific Northwest. He'd negotiated deals with Fortune 500 companies, outsmarted competitors, and bought this house with a view of Puget Sound for her, for them. And yet, here she was, grading him like a disappointing midterm, her tone dripping with the kind of pity reserved for someone who'd already lost. Nick didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or slam his fist on the counter. Instead, something inside him clicked, like a gear locking into place. His hazel eyes, usually warm, turned cold, analytical, the way they did when he was sizing up a rival's balance sheet. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. "Understood," he said, his voice flat, final. Leah blinked, her smirk faltering. She'd expected a fight, a shouting match, maybe even tears, something she could roll her eyes at and dismiss. But Nick's calm, that unshakable restraint, threw her off. It was like tossing a stone into a lake and watching it sink without a ripple. She tilted her head, waiting for the outburst that never came. When it didn't, she shrugged, rinsed her plate with a clatter, and scrolled through her phone as she sauntered toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed," she called over her shoulder, her tone as casual as if she just reminded him to lock the door. The faint hum of Netflix drifted from the bedroom, followed by the click of the door shutting. Nick stood alone in the kitchen, the pad thai cooling in its takeout container, the rain tapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't touch the glass of bourbon on the counter. He didn't need it. What burned in him now was sharper, clearer purpose. Not the loud, reckless kind that shouts its plans, but the quiet, relentless kind that grows in the dark, like roots cracking stone. Leah thought she'd dropped a bombshell, thought she'd won by rewriting their marriage as a footnote to her ambition. She had no idea she'd just handed him a blueprint. He crossed the room to his home office, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The glow of his laptop screen cut through the darkness, casting shadows on the walls lined with framed contracts and awards. His fingers moved with precision, pulling up files he hadn't touched in years. Cascade Ventures, a shell company he'd created 5 years ago during a failed acquisition, dormant but pristine, a tax ID, a Delaware P.O. box, and a digital trail so clean it could pass a federal audit. It was a ghost, invisible and untouchable, exactly what he needed. Nick leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His mind was already mapping the next steps, each one falling into place like a chess move calculated 10 turns ahead. Leah's boss, Dan, worked at Denmore Creative, a mid-sized marketing agency teetering on the edge of insolvency. Nick knew their numbers. Public filings didn't lie. Bloated salaries, a botched software pivot, a major client lost to a competitor. Denmore was a house of cards, and Leah had just given him the match to burn it down. He picked up his phone and dialed Aiden Crow, his corporate attorney, a man who answered calls at 2 a.m. without asking why unless the answer involved blood or a subpoena. "I need a bid package," Nick said, his voice calm but clipped. "Target. Denmore Creative. By sunrise." Aiden didn't hesitate. "Copy that," he said, and the line went dead. Nick's second call was to Garrett Lane, a financier from Redwood Partners he'd met at a Vegas conference 3 years back. They'd bonded over cigars and a shared disdain for executives who chased headlines instead of profits. "Garrett," Nick said, his tone conversational but sharp. "You remember Denmore Creative? They're bleeding cash. I've got an angle, controlling interest, leadership overhaul, expedited restructure. You in?" Garrett's voice crackled with interest. "What's the play?" "Triple your 15% stake in 3 years," Nick said. "I handle ops, you spin the PR. We strip the dead weight and monetize their digital wing." A pause, then, "When do you move?" "Immediately," Nick replied. By 3 a.m., the framework was in place. Aiden texted a draft of the bid documents. Garrett's team sent a pre-approval notice. Cascade Ventures was no longer a ghost. It was a predator, circling Denmore Creative in the dark. Nick closed his laptop, the screen's glow fading to black. He walked upstairs, pausing outside the bedroom door. Leah's soft snores filtered through the wood, oblivious to the machine he'd just set in motion. He leaned his forehead against the frame, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You think I'm boring?" he whispered. "Let's see how you like unemployment." He turned and headed to the guest room, the rain outside a steady drumbeat against the windows. Sleep came easily, heavy and dreamless, like a stone sinking into deep water. Leah thought she'd rewritten their story with a fling. She had no idea she'd just triggered a corporate coup, one that would leave her standing in the wreckage of her own choices. The rain didn't stop, hammering Seattle streets like a metronome to Nick Calvin's resolve. Leah's betrayal wasn't just a wound. It was a map, and Nick was already charting the course to her downfall. By 4 a.m., his office was a war room, the laptop's glow carving sharp angles across his face as he breathed life into a ghost. Cascade Ventures. Nick hadn't touched the bourbon in the kitchen, hadn't paced or cursed. His anger was colder, surgical, the kind that didn't cloud judgment but sharpened it. Leah thought she'd humiliated him, thought her fling with Dan, her smarmy boss at Denmore Creative, was a checkmate. She didn't know Nick played chess, not checkers, and he was 10 moves ahead before she'd even touched the board. Cascade Ventures, a shell company he'd spun up in 2018 for a deal that never materialized, was his opening gambit. It was clean, Delaware registered, tax compliant, a digital phantom with no fingerprints, perfect for what came next. He leaned forward, fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up Denmore Creative's public filings. The numbers were a mess. $2.3 million in debt, a 17% drop in revenue after losing their biggest pharma client, a software pivot that bled cash faster than a bad gambler. Dan's leadership was a parade of red flags, inflated expense reports, a pending HR review for conduct issues. Nick's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Leah had picked a sinking ship to hitch her star to, and he was about to capsize it. His first call, already made at 2 a.m., was to Aiden Crow, his attorney, a man who could draft a contract in his sleep and had the ethics of a shark. Aiden was on board, no questions asked, assembling a bid package to acquire Denmore's controlling interest. The second call, placed now as the sky outside grayed with dawn, was to Garrett Lane, a financier from Redwood Partners with a nose for distressed assets and a taste for high-stakes plays. Nick had met him at a Vegas conference, where they'd swapped stories over cigars and scoffed at executives who chased clout over capital. "Garrett," Nick said, his voice smooth but edged. "Denmore Creative's circling the drain. I'm putting together a quiet buyout. You want in?" Garrett's laugh was low, intrigued. "What's the angle?" "Controlling stake, leadership purge, digital wing spun off for profit," Nick said. "Your 15% triples in 3 years. I run ops, you handle the optics." A beat of silence. Then, "How fast?" "Yesterday," Nick replied. Garrett didn't need convincing. By 5:15 a.m., his team had wired a pre-approval notice for funding. Aiden texted at 5:30. Bid documents were ready, structured to exploit Denmore's desperation without raising flags. Cascade Ventures was now a predator, its jaws poised to snap shut. Nick closed his laptop, the screen's light fading as the first rays of morning seeped through the blinds. He stood, stretching, his reflection in the window a man remade. Not by rage, but by purpose. Upstairs, Leah slept, her phone charging beside her, its screen likely filled with smug texts to her friends about her new life. She'd posted that night on Instagram. A selfie in her blazer, captioned #BossLady with a wink emoji. Nick had seen it, the notification pinging his phone as he'd sat in the kitchen, her betrayal still steaming in the air. She thought she was untouchable, floating on the high of her affair and a promised promotion to VP of Client Strategy. She didn't know her world was already rigged to collapse. Nick's plan wasn't just about taking Denmore. It was about dismantling the stage Leah had built her ego on. He knew her, knew the way she craved validation, the way she measured her worth in likes, titles, and brunches with her empowered circle. Denmore was her pedestal, and Dan was her shortcut to the top. Nick wasn't going to knock her off. He was going to pull the entire platform out from under her, piece by piece, until she was left with nothing but the echo of her own choices. He opened a new file, labeling it Denmore Audit. This was the second phase. A takeover would give him control, but control wasn't enough. He needed evidence, irrefutable, airtight proof of Leah and Dan's misconduct. Denmore's internal systems were a goldmine waiting to be tapped. Anonymous tips to their whistleblower hotline, flagged expense reports, security footage from the executive floor. Nick knew where to look. He'd spent years building systems to catch inefficiencies. Catching cheaters wasn't much different. A few keystrokes, a discreet email to a contact in Denmore's IT department, and the first domino would fall. By 6 a.m., Nick showered and dressed in a charcoal suit, the kind he wore for acquisitions or funerals. Both felt fitting today. He glanced at the bedroom door as he passed. Leah's snores a faint hum. She'd wake up soon, probably scroll through her phone, maybe even text Dan about their next strategy session. Nick's jaw tightened, but he didn't linger. He grabbed his keys and headed to the garage, the rain-soaked city sprawling before him as he pulled onto the street. His phone buzzed as he merged onto I-5. A message from Aiden. "Bids live. Denmore's board is spooked. Pharma clients exit hit hard. They'll bite." Nick didn't reply. He didn't need to. The machine was running, each cog turning with precision. Leah thought she'd rewritten their marriage with a fling, thought she'd traded a boring husband for a shiny new life. She didn't see the shadow moving behind her, the one with Nick's name on it. He pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, not because he needed caffeine, but because he needed a moment to savor the clarity. The rain streaked his windshield, blurring the neon sign outside. Nick leaned back, his mind racing through the next steps. The audit, the board's vote, the moment Leah's smug grin would crumble. He wasn't just taking Denmore. He was taking her future, her status, her everything, and he'd do it without raising his voice. By noon, Cascade Ventures' offer was on Denmore's table, framed as a lifeline to a drowning company. Nick knew they'd take it. Desperate boards didn't ask questions. They saw dollar signs and signed. And when they did, Nick would be inside, pulling every lever, flipping every switch. Leah's Instagram would go quiet soon. Her hashtag #BossLadyDreams would fade to black. And Nick? He'd be the one holding the plug. Leah's Instagram glowed with smug confidence. A carousel of power suits and coffee cups captioned #grind mode. She thought she was untouchable, a queen scaling the corporate ladder while Nick, her boring husband, faded into irrelevance. But in the shadows of Seattle's corporate underbelly, Nick Calvin was rewriting her fairy tale into a nightmare. It was Monday, 6 days after Leah's confession had lit the fuse. Nick sat in a rented office downtown, a nondescript space with a view of the Puget Sound's gray churn. Cascade Ventures, his phantom company, had sunk its claws into Denmore Creative. The board, spooked by a hemorrhaging balance sheet and whispers of scandal, had accepted his offer for a 51% controlling stake late Friday. No fanfare, no press release, just a quiet letter of intent slipped through a brokerage firm that asked no questions. Nick now held the reins, and he was ready to pull. Denmore Creative was a house of cards, and Nick had studied every warped beam. Public filings showed a company drowning in $2.3 million of debt, its innovation department a black hole that hadn't turned a profit in years. Dan, Leah's boss and lover, was the poster child for its rot. Expense reports padded with client dinners at boutique hotels. A pending HR probe for inappropriate conduct. Leah, his eager accomplice, had tied her ambitions to a man who couldn't even cover his tracks. Nick's plan wasn't just to take the company. It was to expose them, to let their own arrogance bury them. He opened his laptop, the screen flickering to life with a spreadsheet labeled Denmore Audit. This was the guillotine. Nick had spent the weekend planting seeds. Anonymous tips to Denmore's whistleblower hotline, each one precise. Dates, times, billing codes that didn't add up. One flagged a $1,200 charge for a strategy session at a waterfront hotel. No clients present. Another pointed to security footage from the executive floor, time-stamped 11:47 p.m., showing Leah slipping into Dan's office when the building was empty. Nick didn't need to fabricate evidence. Their sloppiness was his arsenal. His phone buzzed. Aiden Crow, his attorney, texted, "Audit team's in. IT's pulling server logs now. You sure about this?" Nick's reply was a single word. Yes. He'd hired a compliance firm, discreet and ruthless, to comb through Denmore's records. By noon, they'd unearthed a treasure trove. Emails between Leah and Dan, laced with flirtations and coded plans for off-site meetings. Expense reports listing client entertainment that aligned with Dan's conference trips. Calendar invites for strategy sessions at hotels with no meeting rooms booked. Every breadcrumb was cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced in a dossier thick enough to choke a boardroom. Nick leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He wasn't just building a case, he was crafting a spectacle. Leah's world revolved around her image, her #BossLady persona propped up by Instagram likes and brunches with her clique. She'd posted that morning, a selfie in Denmore's glass-walled office, captioned "Big things coming #VP mindset." Nick's jaw tightened. She was so busy preening she didn't see the noose tightening around her neck. The first crack appeared that afternoon. An internal memo, leaked to Denmore's staff chat, announced a comprehensive operational review ordered by the new majority shareholder. Whispers spread like wildfire. Layoffs, restructuring, a forensic audit. Employees traded nervous glances in the break room. Dan, oblivious, strutted through the office in a tailored suit, his fake Rolex glinting under the fluorescence. Leah trailed him, her smile tight, sensing the shift but too arrogant to suspect her own exposure. By Wednesday, the audit hit critical mass. A junior HR assistant, tipped off anonymously, posted a screenshot in a private company thread. A grainy still from the security footage, Leah entering Dan's office at midnight. No context, just a timestamp and a question mark. The thread exploded speculation, memes, veiled accusations. Someone linked it to a regional business forum, And within hours, Denmore's clients were asking pointed questions. Their biggest remaining account, a tech startup, threatened to pull out, citing leadership concerns. The board, already on edge, called an emergency meeting. Nick watched it unfold from his rented office, a burner phone pinging with updates from a contact in Denmore's IT crew. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't about joy, it was about precision. Leah and Dan had built their affair on company time, company dime, company servers. Now those same systems were turning on them, each byte of data a nail in their coffin. Thursday morning, Leah posted again. A cryptic quote about rising above the noise with a heart emoji. Nick saw it while sipping coffee at a diner near the office. Her defiance was almost admirable, like a captain rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. He swiped the notification away and dialed Aiden. "Push the compliance report to the board," he said. "Today." By 3 p.m., the report landed, a 47-page indictment of Dan and Leah's misconduct. It detailed $18,000 in misallocated expenses, 14 policy violations, and a pattern of unprofessional conduct, backed by emails, footage, and receipts. The board, desperate to save face, didn't hesitate. They greenlit immediate action. Nick, as Cascade's silent partner, signed off, his name buried in a maze of LLCs. No one knew the man pulling the strings was the same one Leah had dismissed as boring. That night, Nick drove home, the city's lights blurring through the rain. Leah was at a rooftop bar with her friends, probably toasting her promotion. Her latest Instagram story showed her clinking champagne glasses, the Seattle skyline behind her. #women in charge, she'd written. Nick parked in their driveway, the house dark except for a single kitchen light. He sat in the car, rain drumming on the roof, and allowed himself a moment, not of triumph, but of clarity. Leah thought she was writing her own story. She didn't know she was a character in his, and her chapter was about to end. Leah's champagne flute caught the Seattle skyline's glow, her laughter brittle as she toasted her empowered future. She thought she was invincible, but Nick Calvin's trap had already snapped shut, and the ground beneath her was crumbling. It was Friday evening, a week since Denmore Creative's board had unknowingly handed Nick the keys to their kingdom. Cascade Ventures, his shadow company, now owned 51% of the agency, and the audit Nick had unleashed was a wildfire, consuming Leah and Dan's carefully curated lies. The 47-page compliance report, packed with damning emails, misallocated expenses, and midnight security footage, had landed like a guillotine. The board, desperate to salvage their sinking ship, had authorized immediate terminations. Nick, the invisible puppeteer, watched it all unfold from a rented office downtown, his burner phone buzzing with updates. Dan was the first to fall. At 9 a.m., he'd swaggered into Denmore's conference room, expecting a routine leadership meeting. Instead, Nick's compliance team, flanked by HR, slid a manila envelope across the walnut table. "Termination," the HR director said, her voice flat. "Effective immediately." Dan's fake Rolex glinted as he snatched the papers, his smirk fading to panic. The dossier detailed $18,000 in fraudulent expenses, policy violations, and footage of his strategy sessions with Leah. He flipped through pages, his face draining to the color of copier paper. "This is a setup," he stammered, but the HR director cut him off. "Sign the NDA or lose severance." He signed, hands trembling, and security escorted him out, his box of desk trinkets a pathetic crown for a fallen king. By 10 a.m., he was gone, his office locked, his email account wiped. Leah was still at her desk, oblivious, typing furiously on a pitch she thought would clinch her VP promotion. Her Instagram from that morning, a latte art heart captioned #hustleharder, had racked up likes from her clique, all blissfully unaware of the storm. The office buzzed with gossip, the leaked security still of her in Dan's office now a viral ghost haunting group chats. Colleagues avoided her gaze, their whispers sharp as needles. Leah felt the shift, her smile tightening, but she chalked it up to jealousy. She was untouchable, wasn't she? Nick arrived home at 6 p.m., the rain-slicked Capitol Hill house quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher. Leah was out, likely at her rooftop bar, posting stories of clinking glasses and #women-in-charge bravado. He set a plain white envelope on the kitchen island, its weight heavy with inevitability. Inside was her termination notice, a mirror of Dan's. Same violations, same evidence, same finality. But Nick had added a personal touch. A single page banning her from reapplication to any company tied to Cascade Ventures or its affiliates. Her career, her network, her ladder to the top, severed with one signature. Leah walked in at 9 p.m., her heels clicking, her face flushed from wine and forced confidence. She froze when she saw Nick at the island, the envelope in front of him. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp but unsteady, like a tightrope walker sensing a gust. Nick met her eyes, his gaze cold, unyielding. "Read it," he said, sliding the envelope toward her. He kissed her forehead, a gesture soft but final, like a eulogy. Carefully, she tore it open, her fingers fumbling. Confusion gave way to dread as she scanned the pages. Violation of ethics policies, $9,000 in misreported expenses, emails with Dan scheduling off-site brainstorming at hotels. The security logs were there, time-stamped, her name in bold. Her breath hitched when she reached the last page. Nick's signature, not as her husband, but as Nicholas Calvin, managing partner, Cascade Ventures. Her eyes widened, the realization crashing like a wave. The man she'd mocked as boring now owned her world and had just burned it down. "You can't do this," she whispered, papers trembling in her hands. Her voice cracked, the #BossLady facade shattering. "You're ruining me." Nick leaned back, his tone as casual as hers had been when she'd confessed her affair. "You said it was no big deal," he said. "I agreed." He walked past her, out the front door, into the rain-soaked night. Behind him, a muffled gasp, then silence. No screams, no slammed doors, just the weight of her choices settling like dust. Leah sank into a chair, papers scattering like fallen leaves. The house felt too big, too empty. Her phone, once alive with notifications, was silent. She called Nick, once, twice, 10 times, each ring unanswered, each voicemail deleted. By the 11th, he picked up, putting her on speaker without a word. "You're ruining my life," she screamed, her voice raw, panic clawing through. Nick let the silence stretch, then replied, "You chose this." The line went dead. She called again, but his number was blocked, her access to him and Denmore erased. By midnight, her Instagram was still up, but the likes had stopped. Her friends' group chat, usually buzzing with support, went quiet. The brunch invites dried up. The stay strong emojis vanished. Leah's empire of validation crumbled faster than Denmore's stock. She sat alone, the dishwasher's hum mocking her, the wine glass on the counter catching the last glint of light. She traded a marriage for a fling, a future for a title, and now both were gone. Nick drove through the city, the rain a steady rhythm against his windshield. He didn't feel triumph, didn't feel joy, just a quiet, unshakable clarity. Leah thought she'd played him. She didn't know she'd been a pawn in a game she never saw coming. The Seattle skyline shimmered under a rare, clear sky, but Leah stood in the shadows, staring up at a name that had once been hers. Caldwell and Stone, etched in backlit glass, crowned the building where her dreams had burned. Nick Calvin, the man she'd dismissed as boring, had rebuilt an empire on the ashes of her betrayal, and she was nothing but a ghost in its reflection. 3 weeks had passed since Leah's world collapsed. The termination notice Nick had left on the kitchen island was a death sentence. Not just for her job at Denmore Creative, but for her entire career. The dossier detailing her and Dan's misconduct, $9 $000 in misreported expenses, policy violations, compromising emails, had spread like wildfire through Seattle's business circles. Her Instagram, once a shrine of #BossLadyBravado, was a graveyard. Her last post, a defiant rising above the noise, sat at 0 likes. Her friends' group chats fell silent, brunch invites vanished, and the women who cheered her empowerment ghosted her without a word. Leah, 35, had traded a marriage for a fling, a future for a title, and now stood alone, clutching a useless Denmore badge in a parking garage beneath her former office. Nick, 38, stood on the rooftop of the rebranded Caldwell and Stone headquarters, a crystal tumbler of Glenfiddich in hand. The launch party was invitation only, no influencers, no hashtags, just select investors and a leadership team he'd handpicked from the ground up. Denmore Creative was gone, its name stripped from signage, its systems purged, its legacy incinerated. In its place rose Caldwell and Stone, a lean, innovative firm poised to dominate Seattle's marketing scene. Nick's dark charcoal suit blended with the twilight, his hazel eyes scanning the city he now owned a slice of. A string quartet played near the pool deck, their notes mingling with the hum of civilized laughter. A partner from the legal wing clinked glasses with him. "Smooth transition," he said. Nick nodded. "You have no idea. The transition had been surgical." After Dan's termination, Nick had moved swiftly, installing a new board and restructuring Denmore's bloated operations. The digital wing, once a money pit, was spun off into a profitable subsidiary under Garrett Lane's PR magic. Cascade Ventures, Nick's shadow company, remained invisible, its role in the takeover buried in a labyrinth of LLCs. Leah's banned from Cascade-affiliated companies. A single, devastating page in her termination packet ensured she'd never climb another corporate ladder in the Northwest. Her name was a blacklisted string in every HR database Nick's network touched. Her career a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Leah hadn't gone quietly. The night she'd opened the envelope, she'd called Nick 11 times, her screams of "You're ruining my life" echoing through his speakerphone. He'd blocked her number, revoked her company email, and deactivated her keycard. She tried to spin the narrative, texting her friends that Nick was a vindictive ex, sabotaging her out of jealousy. For a fleeting moment, her circle rallied, angry emojis, "Stay strong, Queen," gifs, passive-aggressive quotes about toxic men. But then the leak happened. An anonymous post to a regional business forum, screenshots of her emails with Dan, expense reports for hotel meetings, the infamous security still, spread faster than gossip at a high school reunion. The truth didn't need Nick's voice. It walked into the room and set fire to Leah's lies. She'd shown up at Caldwell and Stone that morning, her Audi dusty, her blouse wrinkled, as if she hadn't slept. Her badge, now a useless relic, buzzed red at the entrance. The receptionist, a new hire with no idea who Leah was, had smiled politely. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your access is revoked." Leah's face had crumpled, but she didn't argue. She'd walked to the parking garage's lowest tier, leaning against her car, staring up at the building. The valet stand above echoed with laughter, the string quartet's notes floating down. This was her skyline, her company. She'd told everyone Denmore was her second home, that she'd built it with Dan. Now it thrived without her, its new name a monument to her failure. Nick hadn't invited her, but he'd known she'd come. He'd seen her car from the rooftop, a speck in the garage's shadows. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his glass to her defeat. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about reclamation. Leah had thought she could rewrite their marriage, trade Nick's loyalty for a corner office and Dan's sleazy charm. She hadn't seen the chessboard, hadn't known Nick was playing for keeps. He stepped to the roof's edge, the city sprawling below. A memory flickered, Leah's laugh years ago, soft and genuine. At a dive bar where they'd planned their future over cheap beer. That Leah was gone, buried under the ambition that had led her to Dan's office after hours. Nick's grip tightened on the tumbler, then relaxed. He'd loved her once, enough to leave her the house, the car, a personal account with enough equity to start over. But she wasn't welcome in his world anymore. Leah looked up one last time, her posture slumping, as if gravity had finally claimed her. She climbed into her Audi and drove off, the taillights fading into the city's pulse. Nick turned back to the party, the quartet striking up a new song. The partner clapped his shoulder. "To new beginnings," he said. Nick raised his glass, the Glenfiddich catching the light. "To building something unbreakable," he replied. This was the last time he saw her, unless you counted the reflection in the glass. A woman staring at a name she used to know, carved into a world she no longer belonged to. Nick didn't look back. He'd reclaimed his future, not with rage, but with the quiet power of a man who dared someone to break him and won.